Well, for our final speaker this morning, we have Dr. Joel Nerem. He's going to be speaking to us on production costs before and after disease elimination and advantages of starting negative. Joel has been a practicing veterinarian for 28 years. After starting his career in bovine practice, he relocated to swine and has worked with Christensen Farms for 5 years, then joined the Pipestone system in 2006 and served many roles there. Today, he serves on Pipestone's board of directors and visits clients on farm in the USA as well as internationally.
Thanks, Dr. Murray. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It is a privilege to be invited to speak and to be invited to speak on the 50th anniversary of the Leman Conference. I still remember my very first Leman Conference 25 years ago. I was a young bovine veterinarian who had been handed all the swine clients in the practice, and I was incredibly out of my league. And I remember coming to St. Paul to my first Leman Conference to try and get up to speed, and never once dreamed I'd be standing here giving a talk at the Leman Conference, so thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for staying to the bitter end here. We're in the final presentations of this conference, and so thank you for staying with me. I was never a good baseball player, so I've never batted cleanup before, and so I'm sort of batting cleanup here for two guys that were way better ball players than me. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity to talk. We're going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm not going to talk specifically about PED. A great case has been made here today, I think, for pursuing a national elimination. I think I can't say it better. And so what I'm going to talk about a little bit is really how our group has approached simply not just focusing on PED, but other diseases in swine, and what benefits there are to, let's just say, starting with a really healthy pig. I'm going to apologize to anybody that was at AASV and actually heard my talk there, because a lot of what I'm going to say I presented at the AASV meeting recently in Nashville last February or March, February I think it was. And so, but Monsi kindly asked me to come and talk about a few of the points that I had made in that meeting, so I just want to give that disclaimer here to you today. And after all, our focus here as veterinarians and as producers is the pig. And I often find that when I'm struggling to figure out where to focus, what to do, always bring it back to the pig is very, very helpful. And much of my talk at AASV and sort of the inspiration for what we talked about was a challenge to swine veterinarians that was issued by some of our colleagues. Dr. Gordon Spronk, Dr. Karen Havis, Dr. Gil Patterson, Dr. Scott D. And are we, as the next generation of swine veterinarians, ready to tackle the kinds of challenges that are before us? And disease was one of those topics that I discussed in that previous talk. And I think the challenge of PED elimination is one of those challenges that we have to engage in. There's obviously other challenges, right? And all you need to do is look at recent headlines. You know, these are articles that I'm going to show you here from the popular press here in the United States about the challenges that we as an industry faced and still face, right? I mean, we've got sow mortality levels at levels that aren't acceptable in general, and many of those are health related, right? We've also got wean to finish mortality at levels that, frankly, I'm not proud of. And we as an industry and as a profession shouldn't necessarily be proud of either. And so when we actually look at the data bears this out. And here's some interpig data that's a few years delayed, but I don't know that this has changed dramatically over the last couple of years, but basically showing that amongst the countries surveyed here, that the United States ranks dead last in finishing mortality in this particular case. And, you know, another way to look at it here, again, this is interpig data where we're looking at both the sow mortality along with birth to market mortality, and we in the U.S. Have some work to do. And so I throw this in just because this was maybe the best piece of advice that I got as a young bovine veterinarian trying to become a swine practitioner, and this was from one of the partners at the Harmony Vet Clinic where I was working, and this has always sort of resonated with me because I was always concerned that there was a whole bunch of things I didn't know, and that I wasn't of value to my client because I didn't know all the answers. And Bob Peters took me aside one day and said, hey, he says, you miss more by not looking than you do by not knowing. And I think that is an important, it's always helped me, and I think it can help us as a profession, right? We don't know all the answers today to fix all of the health challenges that we have, but if we're committed to looking, if we're committed to taking the time to honestly engage and look, I think we can work together to achieve results that we haven't been able to get so far. So what I want to talk to you about is something that we've come to talk about, at least in our group, as we focus on trying to elevate the health of the farms that are under our care, is what we're calling next generation health. If we're going to think about what we're going to be as next generation veterinarians, we need to think about what's the next generation of health that we're trying to achieve. And so we in our group and in our practice have came up with sort of the concept of what we call simplified health. Because when you go start talking to customers, to farmers, to producers, and start talking about what's the health of your farm, right? Well, one of the first things we gravitate to is what's your PRRS status, right? And then we have a classification system with AASV with respect to how we classify PRRS. Well, then we talk about PED. What's your PED status? Or for all the enteric coronaviruses. What's your health status with respect to Mycoplasma pneumonia, influenza, and even the various pathogenic bacteria that might be present on the farm? And so we came up with a strategy whereby we would classify the farms that we work with. And oftentimes these are farms that we have actual management responsibility for. And we wanted to come up with a classification system that was simple and easy to communicate both internally amongst our team, amongst the veterinarians and the production staff that are working with these farms, but also with the client. And how do we describe to the owners of those farms, where does your farm categorize with respect to overall health, and how does it benchmark and categorize against the farms of your neighbor? And so that's where we came up with a simple health with a very simple classification system of green, yellow, and red. And so you're going to see how that plays into our approach to really looking at the performance of pigs that come from farms of different health status. We've got different there's essentially a way by which we classify those farms, but to be a green health farm, you basically have to be negative for all of those categories at once, okay? I've got to be PRRS naive, I've got to be MHIO naive, I've got to be influenza negative, I've got to be negative for the enteric coronaviruses, and I can't have a devastating pathogenic bacteria that is endemic in those farms. And so that's the goal. We want all of our farms to be green. That's the ultimate North Star for us and what we're trying to accomplish. And so what's been our level of success as it relates to sort of the simplified health classification? So I'm going to show you a series of graphs that sort of track our over time, and some of these are only over a few years time frame. So right there you're looking at what's the PRRS status of farms that we would be working with, and so this data set would represent 80 or so farms, somewhere just shy of 400,000 sows would be represented by this, and so you can see what our green, yellow, and red with respect to PRRS looks like across that cohort of farms over the last 2 years. Here you can see what it looks like for the enteric coronaviruses. That's the top chart. This is one of the reasons why I'm very bullish on PED elimination, because I definitely think it's possible to get it out of breeding herds and keep it out. Now, we're not perfect, but I do think that this is evidence that we can do it and we should do it. And then you can see on the bottom chart there, that says Mycoplasma pneumonia is what that would be referring to. And so it's one thing where if you would pan back to about 2015, probably about 30% of those farms would have been Mycoplasma pneumonia green or negative at that time. And so we're very excited about the progress we've made with Mycoplasma over the years to basically getting to a 93% negative rate at this time. Influenza. We talked a lot about influenza earlier today and also earlier in the Leman program. I would say the same trend holds true there. Well, I would say if you go back to 2015, there'd be 0 green farms within our network that were influenza negative. Today, we just popped over the 75% mark. And so we're at 76% influenza negative. We have a way to classify and monitor that. We're doing ongoing monitoring of influenza status on those farms. But what that would mean is you're getting an influenza negative or naive gilt into that farm, and we're weaning influenza negative pigs coming off. And then finally, the bottom one there, bacterial health. That's a little more complicated one with respect to how we define that. And we can, if you have questions about that, I'm happy to talk later about that. But again, we're continuing to make improvement there as it relates to achieving a status where we don't have these highly pathogenic strep suis and Haemophilus or Glasarella parasuis strains that would be impacting health. So when we combine all of that together, okay, and take every one of those categories and for every farm and combine them, this is what our simplified health trend looks like today across that same collection of sow farms. And so you could look back a couple of years ago, we were at 7% green. And today, just over 2 years later, we're at 33%, okay? We've got a long way to go. But we feel like we've made some pretty good improvement over that time. And this, the way we've classified and began to talk about and think about this, we believe has helped align our efforts to help everyone see the goal. And we think that we've got room to continue to drive this. So you can say, Joel, that's all well and good. You've got this nice color scheme and it's very, very interesting, but what does it mean, right? Like where does the farmer get value from this? And so that's a great question. Well, before we get there, just as a summary, okay? Our simplified health categorization or classification system really is just a characterization of health status that incorporates multiple pathogens. It has set the North Star in health for our team. And so it helps our vet team, it helps our clients, and maybe it'll help the industry, okay? But right now it's helping our vets and our clients. And one of the things that it does is it really helps establish the priorities for the on-farm veterinarian, right? By understanding what my simplified health score is, what are the pathogens that I'm not green on, and what am I doing as that farm vet to get to green, okay? So it really helps align efforts and make sure that our activity is consistent with the end goal. The second thing it does is it helps reinforce expectations, particularly with respect to antibiotic use or even animal health costs. A green farm should be spending much less on antibiotics than a farm that's yellow or red, okay? And if we're not aligning to that, then there's something wrong. We need to have some conversations about how are we being the best stewards of antibiotics as well as financially for that particular farm. And then we'll show in a few minutes how it correlates to wean to finish profitability. This is a comparison chart. This is one of the ways that we track antibiotic usage within this sort of cohort of managed farms. Every farm, all of these farms, we would be monitoring antibiotic use basically through purchases, okay? So we're using sales as a proxy for use. But essentially there you can see each of the bars across the bottom, you can see the different colors. And as you look, most of the time the green bars are pretty small. And especially after about March of 2023, where we really started to align around this, that's when our expectations on antibiotic use with respect to health status really started to line up, okay? This is just another way to look at our simplified health classification. This is a bit of a redundant slide, I apologize, but again, you can sort of see the trend over time as it relates to hopefully an increase in the number of green farms, a reduction in the number of red farms, with yellow really as a transition point. So let's talk about disease. And so before we talk about outcomes based on the red, yellow, green, I'm going to show you, and a lot of this data here is data from wean to finish producers that are customers of Pipestone, for whom we offer a records keeping service for. So we've got very, very good data on these groups. It does not represent all of the pigs that would be coming from the full set of sow farms that are represented in the previous slides. I hope that's clear for everyone. So this is a subset of pigs placed that we would have really good data for, not across the entire managed farm base. What this basically just shows is what's the number of pigs over time that are placed PRRS negative, okay? This graph represents PRRS only. And then this is from one of our recent client meetings where we look at this every year with this particular subset of clients. You can see the number of groups. Our PRRS health level is a little different. It's upside down from AASV. So actually PRRS level 1 is a PRRS naive. 1, 2, and 3 are PRRS naive. But there you can essentially see that this is tracking the performance of pigs and the closeout information from those pigs defined by health status at placement, only their PRRS health status, okay? So across this data set, which is representing a substantial number of pigs, we would say there's a $5.42 advantage for placing your pigs naive versus placing them from a positive farm, either a farm that is in acute infection or a farm that is quote-unquote positive stable, if you will. So definitely value to placing pigs PRRS negative. And this doesn't take into account anything that happens after weaning from a health perspective. This is only about the health status at placement. This has nothing to do with health. This was just another cool chart or slide that was in the deck that relates to wean age. We're sort of all in on an increased wean age, and this would just be more data for us showing the advantage of weaning pigs greater than 22 days of age. So what does performance look like based on our red, green, yellow classification, right? Is there a difference? And we would say the data we have to date would suggest there is. And so you can see the color of the bar here represents the health classification of the pig at placement based on our red, green, yellow classification system, our simplified health classification. And so you can see the difference in the percent tops sold based on health status at placement. And these would be pigs that go to sort of all locations in the Midwest. There's healthy pigs that go into Iowa, very pig-dense regions, et cetera. These would be farms that would probably run from Illinois to South Dakota, okay? Sort of the full breadth of that area. But very clearly an advantage to high health pigs at placement. This looks at average daily gain on those same pigs. Okay, so what's the benefit in average daily gain to pigs that come from a green health farm versus yellow or red? And then what's feed conversion look like? And again, I think this data set is across about 3 million pigs that were placed in 2022 and 2023. This is our attempt at rolling up that economic value. And so in this particular slide, we're comparing pigs placed green and yellow versus pigs placed red. And just shy of $8 based on the assumptions that were applied at this time. So we believe that there's a tremendous advantage in the health, in the performance of the farm based on the health of the pig at placement, regardless where those pigs are fed. Again, this doesn't take into consideration anything that happened after weaning with respect to what pathogens might have infected those groups. So the question then is well, okay, you've described this, like, how do I achieve next generation health? And we believe that that's very, very achievable. But what it is going to do, it's going to frankly take some farmers or some producers might have to sort of reinvent what their farm looks like. If you're going to be able to to establish a farm that's a green health level and maintain it. How do we make it high health? Well, there's lots of ways that we can eliminate pathogens. Sometimes it might be a depop repop. Quite frankly, a lot of the improvement that our farms have made on the bacteria side has had to be through a depop repop. It's pretty hard to get rid of strep suis or a bad GPS in a breeding herd just simply through a medication strategy. If any of you have done it, I would love to hear more about it. And then always choose your source wisely. One of the things that we discovered is sort of we've gone back and looked at the history of the farms that we work with. The farms that have had more breeding stock sources tend to be the farms that have the biggest bacterial problems. And so the old adage about find a source and stick with it is pretty important, and we've broken a lot of rules over the years that I think we have to like not allow ourselves and our clients to do that anymore. Once I have a sort of next generation health farm, how do I keep it there? Well, that's going to take what we're calling next generation biosecurity. And a big part of that is location. I'll just be honest with you. Farms tend to, a breeding herd tends to stay clean when you go put it in a location that is not very pig dense. And I think that's how we have to retrain ourselves to think about where we're going to go long term as it relates to next generation health and all of this, how it ties to sustainability. In the interest of time, I won't go through a number of these slides. Dr. Scott D. presented yesterday, and he's had a number of publications recently really validating what we're calling next generation biosecurity, which is really focused on all the various routes of transmission of swine pathogens, and including the aerosol route and the feed route. We would very strongly believe that those are two very, very important routes of transmission, particularly of viruses like PRRS and influenza. And if we're not accounting for those things, either by location or filtration, we're going to struggle to keep an extremely high health status for a breeding herd. I'll skip through some of this data because all of this is published. Scott would love to talk about it if you wanted to talk about it with him. But again, I'll really emphasize location matters. And so, you know, we sort of think about it. It was really interesting this morning. Dr. Burr, I believe, was the one talking a little bit about taking us down memory lane from a historical perspective about all the changes that have happened in the last 50 years. And, you know, we moved to 3-site production, and we moved to, you know, SEW and MMEW. We brought pigs indoors. We did scale. But oftentimes we did all of those things not accounting for how diseases move from farm to farm. And I think that's the next step we have to take. We got to get sows away from wean to finish pigs, and we got to go all in, all out by site. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is now thinking about, more, again, what's the cost of disease? We've tried to make the case here about what's the cost of disease as it relates to the pig at placement. There's a project that is a collaborative project that we're working on with Boehringer Ingelheim and with Schick through funding called our Cost of Disease Project, and it's really focused on how do we understand what the cost of disease is in growing pigs. And so we're super excited about this. It's a 200-site surveillance project. We're choosing sites that have all been placed with pigs that come from a green health status. Okay, so they're naive for flu, PRRS, MHIO, the enteric coronaviruses. And those sites also have a biosecurity score. So what are those producers implementing as it relates to some of the very common routes to block common routes of transmission? And then we're going to track the number of disease introduction events that happen on those sites. The goal is how do we assign a cost for a disease introduction in the weaned of market phase? And how do we convince our clients to implement certain biosecurity practices that might reduce the risk of that? Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, but that's sort of the goal of this project. We've got about 45 or 50 groups now that we've got testing data on that have closed, so we're approaching 25% completion of the project. Hopefully we're going to have some really good production data and financial data on these groups that will help assign costs of these disease introductions. And then these are the outcomes. This is what we want to accomplish with this project. And with that, I'll simply say thank you, and I would entertain any questions.